There's a figure that we like to often use when we're presenting low resource languages with respect to Africa, which is 30% of the spoken languages today are African languages. If you consider then that between Egyptian Arabic, Afrikaans, Kiswahili, Yoruba, and Shona, we have more than 200 million people. And those languages currently account for less than 100,000 articles in Wikipedia. What we are looking at there is not just lack of material, but lack of attention. Right?
That not only the research, but even the research problems are defined by people with power.
Right. I'm potentially the only one working on the phone. Doing those research on the phone. So it's like sometimes I feel like I'm the priest preaching in the desert. But hopefully I have some people who are also doing the work on the linguistic side, like trying to create dictionaries. We're working on creating a fun dictionary.
Welcome to everyone to the first NLP panel discussion on low resource languages organized by NeuralSpace. NeuralSpace is a group of scientists, engineers, and passionate people about low resource languages in general. We work on NLP, and we start to organize these panel discussions for us and for the audience to spread the knowledge and make more people interested in low resource languages.
Coming to the question of low resource, do you think the digital presence is the reason for low resource categorization? Because when we are talking about, let's say India, so India has over 1 billion people. India has more than 100, I would say, languages. If we even consider the dialects, it goes over 1,000 maybe. Officially, we say we have 22 languages. So Monojit, how do you consider, or do you consider all or a majority of Indian languages to be low resource? And what's your criteria there?
Sure. So that's I think a very important and interesting question. So there are many ways by which we can define low resource languages. Of course, since we are all talking about NLP and technology here, so by resource we typically mean usable digital data that can be translated into some sort of technology for that language. So with that kind of a definition, if I think of which languages have a low resource, and that's why I say usable data, because that's very important, because a digital presence is, of course, the minimum. If a language doesn't have digital presence, it probably doesn't have any digitized data. But even if it has digital presence, it may not have very usable data. Now, what do we mean by usable data? For building NLP technologies, traditionally we use machine learning, so we require labeled data. Now, there are various kinds of labeled data that one can talk about, starting from, let's say part of speech tag data or transcribed speech data, all the way to parallel data for translation and so on. Now, if you go with how much labeled data is available in different languages, then, a language like Bangla, for instance, we were talking about it a while ago, is definitely low resource, because there is very little labeled data. If you, scout through the web, there are lots of, websites which are catalogs of data sets, like LDC, Linguistic Data Consortium, or the ELRA maintains the map of language data around the world. Even in India specifically, there are similar, catalogs, like AI for Bharat has come up with a catalog of Indian language resources. So the resources in all these languages are growing. However, the amount, to give specific example of Bangla, right? There is a little bit of translation parallel data, but that's not good enough to train a good open, companies might have it. So I'm talking of what's available in the open. So it's not good enough to build good translation systems. There is a very little speech, data that you can build a good speech recognition system. Coming to, high level tasks like natural language inferencing and all, there is absolutely no data that you could use to train or even test a system. So that's why I call it low resource. Now, fortunately, around 2018 or so, since then we have these massive multilingual models, and now we can, do zero-shot transfer across languages, provided we have enough data for pre-training the original model, and that would require unlabeled text data. And Bangla there is one of the lucky languages because it has a lot of unlabeled data, primarily because so many people speak it. It's the national language of Bangladesh. So Bangla Wikipedia is fairly rich. It's an official language. It's a scheduled language of India and so on. We had proposed a two-dimensional classification in one of our recent work, where we looked at both labeled and unlabeled data across two axes and put all the languages as dots there. And we saw that the languages could be divided into 6 categories. On one extreme, you have English and 6 more languages, which has all the data. So they are definitely very high resource. On the other extreme, you have languages which do not have any digital presence. We call it class 0. So they have absolutely nothing. You can't build any technology for them. But in the middle, there are 4 classes. And of them, if I remember correctly, Hindi is in class 2, which is just the next one after English, if English is class 1. And the next one is 3, in which we have Bangla. So what happens to these classes is they have at least a lot of unlabeled data. So you could still train, using zero-shot and other techniques, still train models. If you go below it, right, from 4 onwards, you won't have anything. And now tying it back to your question about India. So if you look at scheduled languages of India, there are, Hindi is the only one which is in class 4. Bangla, Marathi, and one more I'm forgetting is in class 3. Most of the languages, other languages are in 4 or 5. And there are languages like Santhali, which is a scheduled language, but has absolutely no resource. So there are scheduled languages which are also in class, the last class, which has absolutely no resource. Now think of, so India has 100 to 300 languages, depending on how you count. Now, what happens to the remaining languages? So I will tell you the narrative that existed. I started working in this space about 20 years ago. So when I started doing my PhD, and the narrative has been rapidly evolving. So I will tell you the narrative, which was until, very recently, like until 5 years ago. So we had this narrative, which is, so most of the time, it's economics which drives research. Now, if you look at a company like Microsoft or even the government who has to do some business, and if they have to do business across, international business, like Microsoft is is a global company, Google is a global company, so they have to do international business. Now, will they be able to do business in India if they don't serve Indian language as well? Turns out that for at least until 5 years ago, they could, or at least the narrative said so. The reason was most of the people who use digital technology or who control the economy in some sense, were both consumer and producer of digital content, for instance, were conversant in English in India. So the thing was, everybody who uses digital technology knows English. So therefore, we really don't need to build Bangla technology or Hindi technology, Tamil, Telugu, whatever, to do business in India or penetrate the Indian market. This story drastically changed 5 years ago. What happened? It was more smartphones. Even today in rural India, you won't find penetration of laptops or desktops, but everybody uses smartphones. The moment people use smartphones, so India basically leapfrogged. It's a very interesting, and probably Africa is also similar. Both these places, they leapfrogged from no technology to everybody having smartphones, sort of a scenario, and bandwidth and everything became cheap. So immediately now there is a huge digital, market or consumers or user base who can consume technology only if it's provided provided in those languages. So hopefully, I mean, this has changed the narrative. And there are lots of startups, for instance, who are working on Indian languages. Even Microsoft, Google, like, MNCs are now serving Indian languages a lot better and a lot more, right? So I think Bangla, for instance, that's why I said Bangla is one of the luckier languages. So I'm hopeful for Bangla. So I think soon it will catch up, especially with these few short and all these cases, it will catch up. But I don't know what's going to happen for Santhali, for instance, because unless there's a push from some other kind, right, government or the people who use the language, there may not be enough market force to make a case for Santhali technology.
And then you have a huge amount of historical baggage in Africa, especially. So Swahili is an interesting example there. Though Swahili is a native language in the coast of East Africa, and Swahili spoken all the way from Mogadishu in Somalia to Malawi and Namibia on the coast, they are a mixture of English and Swahili and a really fantastic locally formed language that came out of Nairobi called Shen, which mixes Swahili and English and changes even the words. So whereas formal communication will often be in English because that is the language of formality. This is the language of education. This is the language of prosperity. So the language that gets used is very much tied to the context, the reason, the process of interaction. But more importantly, that language is adapting. It's changing. So if you look at the youth, and the really interesting thing is how language is expressed in music and then used in terms of how people communicate with each other in their WhatsApp messages, in their forum discussions. That's not English. It's not Swahili either. It's a mix of these things. And it's new languages that are being formed by people that are bridging all the individual linguistic divides that they have in order to be able to create ways of efficiently and effectively communicating with each other. So it's an infinitely fascinating thing, and it raises a whole host of problems for technology, because technology now has to, if it wants to reach these people, it has to say, well, how do we reach them? Exactly. And how do we get the resources to be able to allow us to build the machinery to be able to get there?
The keyboard, you asked a good question, who's going to use it? For us, people have downloaded it more than, actually, I think is the most downloaded app on the Play Store from Benin. They've been more than 2,000 downloads, and people are starting slowly but steadily understanding the importance of those languages. And they are also, I think the interest is also coming from local artists, because there are now more and more local artists feeling free or feeling at ease to do songs in the native languages. So if they want to write down the lyrics, they will definitely have to use that keyboard, right? Of course, like you said, there will be romanized font, if I can say, with just like the simple and usual English letters, Latin alphabet letters, but that will be already an effort. But the keyboard, we made sure that it uses all the diacritics, all the different aspects of every single letter. Because, for instance, there's an example I used to give. There's the word TO. I mean, that would be simply just the normalized form. But then if we add 4 different accents, it switches meaning from country to ears, from ears to dad, and from dad to C, for instance. So if you mess up those articles, those different diacritics, you mess the whole sense, because it doesn't make sense if you are in a sentence, you are talking about your dad, but then someone understands it as you see, right? It wouldn't make sense. So I was replying to one of the attendees, is going to be a long run, because we are very, very lacking behind. I mean, you were most likely talking about the Indian languages. Mohamed talked about Swahili, who has way more speakers than Fon, and they are still behind. So imagine how it could be. And actually, I don't know. I feel like I'm potentially the only one working on Fon. I mean, doing those research on Fon. So it's like sometimes I feel like I'm the priest preaching in the desert. But hopefully, I have some people who are also doing the work on the linguistic side, like trying to create dictionaries. We're working on creating a fun dictionary, trying to create more content. By instance, introducing a concept who helps to bring a new name. Every day there's a name. Every day we design a name in fun, and then we somehow give its meaning in French. Or sometimes we bring proverbs that do not exist anywhere, that are not cataloged anywhere, and those actually are a way to create more resources. And of course, more and more people are on the internet, more and more people are trying to write in those languages, but there's still a lot of effort to do. So yeah, definitely this is going to be the future, because intrinsically African languages are most like eternal. Like usually, throughout generations, we transmit messages through songs, through griots, through speeches. So they will be definitely more. We make more impact than working on speech than working on text. I mean, I'm not saying that working on text is not relevant, but not so many people can write down. So there are people who have been raised, for instance, the grandma from the village or things like that. Those people, for instance, have not necessarily been to school, right? So don't talk to them definitely about French. And also they've not been a keyboard or things like that, so that they could learn how to write those things down. So the only thing they know is actually the real language, but they cannot definitely write them down. So if you are discussing with them, the discussion is technically not going to flow. But then when you come back on the speech level, you see that those people will feel very comfortable to lead the discussion and to give you advices and everything. So yes, I think that's the way to go, and that will be something that will really impact. Unfortunately, there have not been so much work done on that, especially I can talk only about Fon. When I wanted to do the ASR work, I found only an existing data set of just 10 hours of recordings, and it was a data set I took part in. It was led by one of my professor, and me and few other students, I think we were kind of 28 or 29, 30 maximum. We were the one who somehow made the recordings. So and we have only 10 hours, but I think the pretty decent number of hours required was somehow 10,000. So if you look at 10 hours, 10,000 is very, very, very disproportional.
So yes, a lot of African cultures are oral. So it's much easier to collect speech data. Efforts are underway, so things like the Mozilla Common Voice, which recently got a large fund to collect African speech and African data sets for common good, are underway. Fantastic developments in terms of tech. I mean, the latest unsupervised web-to-vec models are using 20 hours of transcribed text and a couple of hundred hours of unlabeled text to produce fantastic word error rates. All of these things are really useful and helpful, but they are conditioned. So whether that mode will replace what we do with text is conditional on what we assume we do with text. So text is not just what we do in terms of just being able to build free language models. We use it for something. We use it to express something. Nobody's going to write a scientific article today by dictating it to a machine. We're not going to express documentation in that context. There's going to be the need for doing text processing always, because a whole host of knowledge is formatted and expressed and manipulated in text. Yeah. But what audio also enables us now to do is find another way of generating more material to be able to build better text models. So I see a great future if we can adapt these methods, not just in order to apply them to do translations and to apply them for use, but in order to use them to generate more data.
That's a very interesting point. And there are things like TED Talks, podcasts, lots of music is there, lots of movies are there.
Precisely.
And people have been accustomed to this.
And I think the gap that I'm talking of and you're talking of, they are caused by the same thing. You know, the gap between translational research versus, paper-oriented research and the gap that you're talking of, they probably spring from the same cause, which is that not only the research, but even the research problems are defined by people with power.
Right.
I will give you one very concrete example. When 10 years ago we started working on code mixing, most of the people we spoke to, especially people in the US and also, internal people, like people in Microsoft who were in the US at all, said, oh, this is a very, strange problem, weird problem. Why would people even mix language? We don't care about it. And because that was not a reality in their world. But if you look at the world, 50% of the population are multilingual, and most, and all multilingual societies typically tend to mix languages. So even the way you define your problem and the way you prioritize your problem is governed by the powerful people. And that's the equation we have to change. And I would be, I'm very happy to see that it's already changing. Like we have lots of papers on low resource languages, like paper from Masakhane, which are being published, and even ACL theme this year is low resource languages and endangered languages, right? So people are talking about it. We are all talking. So that's a good news already.
And if I can just interrupt, I want to add more to Monojit's call and encourage everybody to look at how they challenge the dominant structure. We don't all need to be building billion parameter models to improve the state of the art. How do we impact on the things that we impact on our lives?
I agree with Mohamed. The race on building the largest, the model with the largest number of parameters should kind of stop and focus more on how those technologies improve our lives.
It was wonderful talking to you, Monojit, Mohamed, and Bonaventure. It was really good discussions. We have tons of questions from the audience. We could not cover a lot of them, but I believe we are going to do this a lot more in future. And thank you again for taking this time. And Felix, do you want to say anything?
No, I just also want to thank all the three panelists, everyone who joined. We are already more than an hour now speaking. It was really, really great, very insightful. We learned a lot. And I hope you can join us in the future too.